Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Jessie Kanzer was born in the Soviet Union. As a descendant of Holocaust survivors, Jessie grew up living in a communal apartment with 4 households, 1 toilet, and an old bathtub in the middle of the kitchen. This led her family to seek asylum in the U.S. After awaiting their fate in Austria and Italy, they finally made it to Brooklyn in 1989. After experiencing depression, an eating disorder, and all sorts of existential problems, Jessie found the resource she needed. With the help of the Tao Te Ching, she rediscovered herself and her innate power, and she learned how to deal with life with less stress. Her book, Don't Just Sit There, Do Nothing, will help others do the same. Her work has appeared in the Washington Post, New York Daily News, Wall Street Journal, The Independent, the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Huffington Post, Ravishly, and Romper. Jessie lives with her 2 daughters and husband in Dobbs Ferry, New York. Jessie Kanzer, what an honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you so much, Casey. It's so fun to be here.
It's really great to have you. I deliberately left out your middle name, which happens to be your given name, in the intro, and I did that for 2 reasons. The first reason is that I probably wouldn't pronounce it right anyway, and secondly, I wanted to hear the story about that. You have such an interesting story, which I want to get into, but I wanted to start there.
I love that you didn't try. I think you could, but with some coaching. So yes, the full name that appears in my book is Jessie Asya Kanzer. Now, my daughter said to me, my 7-year-old, she was like, you didn't have to put Asya in there. Your real name is Jessie. And it's so funny to hear that from her because I was just about her age when I came to America. I turned 8 en route. So I turned 8 while we were waiting for asylum. And my name was, in fact, Asya. As I told her, I was like, well, that's what's on my birth certificate, actually. Wow. But, the pronunciation of a foreign name is not an easy feat ever. And this was also post-Cold War America. It was not the friendliest place from like a little girl from Russia. And people did not enjoy my name, saying my name correctly. They enjoyed making fun of it in different ways. But teachers, even teachers who of course had the best intentions, people had a lot of trouble pronouncing Asya, which is spelled A-S-Y-A. And that is actually the opening chapter. It's funny. It's the opening chapter of my book, Don't Just Sit There, Do Nothing, because the subtitle is Healing, Chilling, and Living with the Tao Te Ching. And so I base the way I tell my story, my own personal story, my observations of the world, my story of healing, is I base it on the teachings of the Tao Te Ching, an ancient philosophy. So every chapter starts off with a verse from the Tao. And the first chapter is all about what we're just talking about right now. It actually says, ways that can be told are not the eternal way. Names that can be named must change with time and place. And of course, that was an easy opening for my initial story of changing my name in America. So my name changed with time and place. I did not enjoy my name as this kind of standout of how different I was, this label of myself being different, not fitting in. We all seek belonging. And so by high school, I changed my name to Jessie and I reinvented a lot of myself. And the story of kind of going from there back to a place of where I include both the little Asya, a girl from another world really, that came here with all of her innocence and enthusiasm for life. And I combined that with this more edgy person who had to become a harder kind of person with everything that I had to go through as Jessie in order to make it to where I am now. So now I'm kind of a combination of all of it.
I love that. It's such a beautiful name, and I was totally right. I would have botched it completely. So I'm glad you clarified that. Does it mean anything, Asya?
That doesn't bother me anymore, FYI.
It's good. I would never make fun of you, for sure. Does Asya mean anything?
I'm sure it does. I don't know. And actually, that's such a great question because that's something I should ask my parents. To me, it has a lot of meaning. I have a vision. Like as soon as you say Asya, I just really envision myself in the Soviet Union. It was really a very black and white world. And perhaps that's how I envision it because also photographs, even though I was born in 1981, all of my childhood photographs are black and white. They look very similar to like your grandmother's photographs. Because of the Iron Curtain and the lack of progress in the Soviet Union, it was very, very much stuck in the past. And so I have this vision of myself, and I have a lot of love for that girl, but there was a lot of stuff I had to go through before I became my whole self.
Interesting. You brought a really good point that I hadn't considered. The Cold War. The Cold War is still going on in those days. Why on earth? Why did they want to come to America of all places?
Oh, my parents dreamed of coming to America. The Soviet Union was, first of all, it was not a good place for Jews. We have a lot of violence in my family history, including the Holocaust. We also are from Latvia, a place that was really, really heavily, Riga, where I'm from, lost like the most amount of Jews during the Holocaust in one place were killed in Riga. And it wasn't an environment that was ever really, there was systemic anti-Semitism is what it's called. You know, the way there used to be systemic racism in this country, like a Jewish person couldn't go to a certain college. And it wasn't even a religious aspect, because actually my family was not religious. It was what was written on our passport. It was a way of identifying people. So there was Russian, there was Latvian, there was Jew. Jews really had a specifically hard time there. And there came a time where America let us in.
Wow, that's amazing. You talked about some of the challenges you faced growing up. Can you talk a little bit about that, the time before you found the Tao?
Absolutely. So what happens to a lot of people? Listen, first of all, we all have our challenges. I have not met one person who hasn't had struggles in their life. And what the Tao Te Ching taught me is that struggles, the bad and the good, are just labels that we give experiences. And in fact, it's all learning. It's all moving forward in life. For me, a lot of the problems came, first of all, there was unaddressed trauma of childhood immigration. I come from a society in a time where nobody paid attention to like child psychology, you know? It was not, nobody asked like, how are you doing? You lost all your friends and everything you knew. Are you doing okay? That just wasn't the case. In the defense of the adults who were in charge of these immigrants, who were, you know, taking us and bringing us across countries, there was a lot of pressure, a lot of survival that needed to be taken care of. You know, we were food insecure for periods of this immigration. And early on here, food stamps, the whole bit. And you really needed the adults focused on picking themselves up by their bootstraps, getting jobs, getting housing. You know, it was very much survival based existence. And there was a lot of trauma for me. I was a very sensitive person. I still am. I mean, I think it was probably a difficult experience for everyone, but for me specifically, I can only really honestly talk to my own experience. The loss of friends, the loss of belonging, the loss of everything you knew at a very young age was very jarring. And I changed a lot of myself to belong, because I am a survivor. I did what I had to do to find belonging, but I didn't address that trauma. And so it followed me later in the form of depression, anxiety, bulimia, which I struggled for 7 years. And I was really at my bottom right after college. On the outside, everything looked great. You know, I did really well. I graduated summa cum laude, but inside I was really dying. First of all, I was dangerously bulimic. It was, you know, these are the kind of life-threatening illnesses that are haunting and that have to be dealt with. And so I wasn't dealing with that. I wasn't dealing with my panic attacks. I was really a hot mess. And shortly after graduating college, I got into a really bad car accident, which stopped me in my tracks. I had no choice. I mean, I had a brain injury and I had to just stop, be still. And I really sucked at being still. You know, that's what the bulimia was for me, just to cover up emotions that I don't want to feel. I would purge and then I would binge because I felt crappy. And then that would be like a terrible cycle. And when I had this brain injury, on top of being like emotionally broken, I was physically broken, real bottom, you know, on the bathroom floor. And I reached for one of the many self-help books I had because I knew I needed help. And I was trying and I was buying different books. But this little Tao Te Ching, it's like a pocket-sized little book. It comes from 6th century BC. It's actually the second most translated book in the world after the Bible, but it is not as well known here as it is in the East. So anyway, I reached for this book. It's very short. It has one verse per page, kind of 81 verses. And I started reading it. And as I started to slowly heal, I would take walks. I remember these cold winter walks, and I would meditate on one verse at a time. And I would really think about it and see how it made me feel. And it slowly began shifting my perspective on life and shifting my understanding of what was going on with me. And slowly I rebuild my life. And I have a very blessed, happy life right now as a mom, a wife. I live in a wonderful place. And all of that took this healing journey, this spiritual healing journey for me.
I love that. I was fortunate enough to find the Tao several years ago as well. And it's fascinating. It's a fascinating book. All the verses are very unique, but they share a kind of, it's hard to say. It's just like paradox, like it, kind of what you said in the beginning, the naming, the verses of the Tao are just so full of different paradox. Can you kind of explain what really jumped out to you? Maybe some of your favorite teachings from the Tao?
Sure. And just so folks know, in Don't Just Sit There, Do Nothing, my book, that every chapter, I start off with a verse of the Tao. So I actually chose 47. It ended up being 47 verses because I tried to decrease the repetitiveness, even though some of that repetitiveness is very needed if you're really going deep into these teachings. I took each verse and then I would even simplify it in like really, really modern terms with curse words and the whole thing, like what really it means to me. And I talked about my own stories with each verse, my own life stories that I felt really showed the teachings of the verse, but sometimes in a really bad way, like what not to do. And each one. So I actually have my book right here in front of me. I love so many of these verses, but one that I think really encapsulates a lot of what the Tao is trying to say. And like you said, it is paradoxical because our existence is complicated and paradoxical. And it really does make you think. I really feel like some of these verses you can look at and try to analyze your entire lifetime. So verse number 9 is the one that, for me, really, I think everyone can relate to. It says, overfill your cup and it will spill. Sharpen a blade too much and it will chip off in use. Fill your house with jade and gold and you will only bring insecurity. Care about people's approval and you will be their prisoner. Do your work, then step back. The only path to serenity. I just think some of the, and when we try to talk about it, this is why the Tao says, like we talked about in verse 1, like the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. It's really hard sometimes to encapsulate the truth, but it just feels true, doesn't it? Doesn't it just feel true?
Yeah, definitely. It's one of those things that I want it to be true,
Yeah. I mean, I found that it is in the last, I've been doing this work for about 20 years now. I'm 40 now. So I started almost 20 years, started 21. And I have so many different translations. I went through a lot of different translations for Don't Just Sit There, Do Nothing. I put different translations together because I wanted to get kind of a little feel of the different versions, but they all lead to the same thing. And to me, that is simplify your thoughts, simplify your ambitions, simplify your schedules. And it's not an easy feat because we are in human form. We're not just spiritual. We are also human and physical, and we come with desires. And to me, what I use the Tao for is to balance that human side, because I do have ambitions and I do have desires. And sometimes we want stuff and whatnot. And so what the Tao always does is bring me back to center, bring me back to, hey, everything is going well. Everything is okay. it also says in a different verse, the best way to live is to be like water, to just flow, to flow with life. And that also helps me go through the harder parts of life, because even though, like I said, I'm in a really good place in life, I've been for a while. Of course, that doesn't mean I think we often confuse, easefulness with easy. So the Tao teaches us to be easeful. Life isn't always easy, but we can be easeful in experiences that are difficult.
I love that. I am struggling so hard with this concept right now in my life. I feel this a lot. And I'm going to read my version, which is a different translation than the one that you have there. And it says, after finishing the work, withdraw. How do you know when it is time to finish your work? That is so difficult. Like you said, when you're trying to be ambitious, you've got goals, there's things you want to do, but there is a time when you have to close your laptop and be done for the day. How do you know when you're there?
And it's so funny. I, at the end, I think I told you in the book, and they'll just sit there, do nothing. At the end of each verse, I would do my own little easier kind of like encapsulation. So my one encapsulation for that verse is know when to stop, with a period after each word. That's all I say about it. That's what it is. Know when to stop. And here's what I found that really helps me. Doesn't mean I always do it, Casey. We're human. But what I found that really, really works is checking in with yourself. This is why I called my book Do Nothing. I don't actually mean do nothing, but I mean that if you take breaks to get still, you become really aware of yourself. And I find that self-awareness is a true superpower that most of us can't have when we're always listening to the outside voices and to the messaging and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I recently read that we consume more information in one day right now than hundreds of years ago people did in their entire lifetime, just several hundred years ago. We consume more in one day. It's hard to hear your own inner voice, and it's hard to have that self-awareness, which is why it's integral to a successful, balanced life. It's integral to get still. So what I've noticed is when I practice stillness, and I do that daily in one way or another, and when I don't, I pay for it, to be honest with you. I could feel myself off. So, but because I practice the stillness regularly, I am aware when my energy is off. And I know that once I start getting overtired, stressed, anxious, whatever that is, I know that whatever I do will be so much less potent than what I do out of a good, stable, centered place. So I know, like, look, maybe I will still finish my work at that time, but it's not gonna be smooth. And maybe I will send out some emails that I have to, but I know inside myself, I have that awareness that if I put it off and I close the computer and I go recenter myself, or I go play with my kids or whatever it is, I know that when I come back to it, it'll be so much stronger. So for me, knowing when to stop it's about being aware what's going inside of yourself. And we're not robots, we're not machines. So we actually have an internal compass that's like, I don't want to do this anymore. And sometimes we push on anyway. Most of us do push on anyway. But if you get in touch, you will feel it.
I really love that. I think one of the main concepts of the Tao is finding your center by finding the edges. You go out and you find your edges, and that tells you when to recenter and how to recenter, because you're already too far one way or the other. And I think that's what you're trying to explain there. When you feel that stress and that overwhelm, you know that you're at one of your edges and you need to have the pendulum swing the opposite direction. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And it says, even in the Tao, it says, untie your knots, right? Remember that one, untie your knots, or loosen your knots and settle your dust. Like, there's a feeling, the stirred up feeling inside of us. I write about that as well. We can, there's different facets to this feeling, but we all know when we're there, when we're zen, or when we're centered, or maybe we're super energetic, but when we're in that place where we can do anything and when we're not. And you're right that the Tao, it's not about, like, what I love about the Tao Te Ching, is that it's not about being perfect and walking some perfect way. It's about finding your way. By the way, the Tao translates as the way. The Tao Te Ching is the book of the way. And so that way, the only way you find it is, like you said, is by finding the edges. It's about the back and forth, like the flow, the ebb and flow of life itself, which includes going to those edges of anxiousness or stress, and then you bring yourself back. So again, it's not about being some perfect spiritual Buddha, because most of us are not. But when you become self-aware, you are able to know when it's time to bring yourself back.
You also wrote about accepting you as the full you. And this is really uncomfortable. I can say for me personally, this is very uncomfortable. The phrase that you wrote, I am friendly and sweet and I am judgmental. We look at the first two things that you say that you are and say, okay, those are good, give them a label. And then we say you're judgmental and we say that's bad. You don't want to be judgmental. But you say it's okay to accept all of that. Can you explain that a little bit?
Absolutely. And it goes back to what you said about the Tao being so paradoxical, because it is. And this is a chapter 2 in my book, which is called I Love You, I Not Love You, which is something my older sister used to say about the baby all the time. I love baby, I not love baby. And I thought, my God, that is so honest. And we can lie to ourselves all we want. We all want to be that sweet, altruistic person. But we have to accept our shadow side. And some people call it shadow work. It's just there. It just is. And the Tao says we're the ones who put the labels. It says people see beauty in what they call beauty. That way they know of the ugly. People see good in what they call good. That way they know of the bad. So it's like labels that we put on experiences and on feelings. And I explain in that chapter that the quote unquote negative feelings are not bad feelings. They're just feelings. And if you strip away, for example, the uncomfortable connotations we give to jealousy, as an example, you strip away, you admit to yourself, hey, I'm feeling jealous right now. And who doesn't in this world? Oh my God, we have like social media at every turn. We see things, people doing great things or people living their perfect life. And jealousy is stirred up in us all the time right now. I know that to be true because I talk to people. I'm a people person. And if we just stuff that down, that is just lying to ourselves. That's not the best way to live. And it's not the best way to find true inner peace. So another way to look at it is to say, hey, I'm feeling jealous right now. And then you realize, what is jealousy? As an example, that's just one quote unquote negative emotion that I'm doing as an example. So you look at jealousy and you say, I'm feeling jealous because I want to do that, or I want to experience that. And so you say, hey, this jealousy feeling is actually just teaching me, clarifying for me what it is that I want to cultivate in my own life. And you thank the person, the picture, the whatever it is, the object that makes you feel jealous. You thank that feeling and you wish well to the person that stirred up that feeling in you. And then what remains then is not negative connotation of jealousy, but the understanding, the clarity of what you want to create in your life. So when you accept those quote unquote negative emotions, you are able to accept yourself fully and you're able to know yourself better.
That's amazing. That's such a great answer and so very hard to do. Great segue into a quote from one of my other favorite books, The Tao of Pooh. I'm sure you have come across it by Benjamin Hoff. Just such a wonderful relating the Tao and the Tao Te Ching to Winnie the Pooh in the series of books. And one of his quotes that I wrote down, it's so good. It's so good. Highly recommend it. One of the quotes from Benjamin Hoff, there are things about ourselves that we need to get rid of. There are things we need to change. But at the same time, we do not need to be too desperate, too ruthless, too combative. Along the way to usefulness and happiness, many of those things will change themselves, and the others can be worked on as we go. The first thing we need to do is recognize and trust our own inner nature and not lose sight of it. I love that. I think it so much relates to what you're talking about as far as embracing those emotions that we give those negative labels.
Absolutely. Because whether you accept or don't accept the truth is still the truth. That's why I say like self-awareness is your superpower. It's not about being aware of how great you are. For example, I wrote an entire book about my life story. I am so proud of myself, et cetera, et cetera. And at the same time, I am not full of myself at all. And if you read that book, you'll understand that I'm not, because I joke, like, don't just sit there, do nothing is basically my one giant humiliation story. Like, I love to look at all my faults and mistakes because I learned so much from them. And the reason I actually put them all in there is because I want people to get more comfortable with their own quote unquote bad sides, bad experiences, bad choices. Because when you're able to own that, you are completely free. You are free of the labels of good, bad, etc. And you realize there's no one quality or one action that defines me.
Yeah, in the introduction, I believe you said you were falling in love with your pitfalls, which I think is amazing. That's really well said. You also say that life is like a zebra, which I thought was great. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes, that's actually a Russian quote. So my dad used to say that to me, that life is like a zebra, when I would be going through one of my angsty experiences as a teenager. So what is a zebra? A zebra is an animal, and it has a certain coloring, and it has one stripe that's white, one stripe that's black, and on and on and on. And it doesn't think about it. It just wears its stripes. And that's very much how life flows. Life goes through quote unquote good experiences, quote unquote bad experiences, and on and on. And again, if we take those labels away, that's why I say, quote, if you take away the good and the bad, it's just life. And some of life's experiences are extremely difficult. We've all experienced loss. And my God, these last couple of years of living through a pandemic, we can't change that life comes with difficulties, but we can change the way we move through difficulties.
I love that. There was a pandemic? Nobody told me. Yeah, that's great. I love that. I think that's very well explained too. One thing that's very difficult of all this, you also address, is the value of not knowing all of life's answers. How can we embrace the mystery that is life that's so uncomfortable?
Yeah, right. You're right that I have a chapter about that because God, don't we want answers so badly? We want absolutes. And as human beings, we really, really, really need to feel comfortable with the knowing. And I think in Don't Just Sit There, Do Nothing, I talked about how the pandemic just turned all of that on its side, because all of a sudden we lost so much of what we thought was just a given. And I think it made a lot of us realize, and what maybe some of us spiritual people have known for a while, that everything's sort of an illusion. Like everything in our physical world, all our constructs, none of them are completely solid. And the way to be okay with that, and with all of this not knowing, because we're still living in a time of a lot of unknowns, the only way to be okay with that is to accept it, right? Like I say, accept what is and go from there. Accept that in this lifetime, you will never know everything 100%. And in fact, the Tao Te Ching says that not thinking you know is a disease. Knowing is a disease. Not knowing is the cure. So progressing on your spiritual journey is not about knowing more. It's about removing all the things you thought you knew.
Yeah, it's just such a paradox and so difficult to do. But you're right. Something you said earlier is once you can do that, you are free. Nothing will ever bother you. And anything that happens in your life will fit within the container that you have created, because you've been, pushing those boundaries and allowing things to happen and being aware of them. I love that. Another thing that you talk about is being both beautiful and ugly at the same time. That's another paradox I wanted you to kind of explain.
Yes, and that's also about the shadow work, sort of, or the shadow part of ourselves. It goes back to, like I said, like I love myself, I'm proud of myself, I wrote a book, blah blah blah. But also, I know how imperfect I am. I know, and I know how imperfect everyone is, which is why I'm not a big fan of just gurus and worship of anyone. And I think it's a really freeing place to be, because if you're never really on kind of you don't put yourself on the pedestal of being like, oh my God, I'm so great. And you also don't rip yourself apart when you inevitably fall off that pedestal. So sometimes you could be a really beautiful person doing really beautiful things, and there's always some quote unquote ugliness inside of all of us, whether it's jealousy or whatever it is, dissatisfaction, not enoughness, being crabby with your significant other. It doesn't matter. Once you remove those labels and allow yourself to just be, you are set free. And then, it's funny because on this journey, like getting to talk to you and like-minded people, it is such a wonderful experience for me, because most places you say the Tao Te Ching and people say to me, da what? And it's so nice to just talk to somebody who's on a similar path of exploration. And to me, this experience in itself is my sort of gift for putting in the work of writing a book, which isn't always easy. And that's all I need from it. So when people say, are you excited? Your book's coming out. And I say, yes, just because that's the thing to say, but I just am. I'm neither excited or not excited. That's the place I've come to in my life, because I like to ride the wave. I don't like to go climb to some really, really big hill from which I'm going to fall. That's my personal choice. I mean, I'm all for if people want to feel really high, that's great too. As long as that fall is going to come. With beauty comes ugliness. There's no other way.
I love that. I loved watching, I believe it was a tweet of you the day you got your book deal and how excited you were. And I know how much, I don't know how much work went into writing the book, but that was a really fun thing to be able to watch and see your reaction, how excited you were. Super, super cool. Talking about nothingness and doing nothing, the Tao says, do nothing and nothing is undone. What is the difference between doing nothing and being lazy? I think a lot of people would look at somebody who is doing nothing and, nothing's undone. Take, for example, Winnie the Pooh in his story. Why is that? Why is nothingness different than laziness?
Well, I don't, to me, it's all semantics. And I will tell you that both me and Winnie the Pooh are lazy. It took me a really long time to embrace that. And that doesn't mean I can't be super hardworking sometimes, but in my essence, oh my God, I love being lazy. I love to be lazy, as does Winnie the Pooh. And it was so much guilt that I carried for that for a long time. I mean, I come from this, the Soviet culture of like very achievement-based culture from a very young age, where school was 6 days a week as an example, and you were pushed really hard. And I was also a gymnast, a Soviet gymnast, and I was pushed hard there too. And, and in America, it's not that we're like so hardcore achievement based with our young kids, but we are very stuff based, right? Like we're very material based with certain cars, certain houses, like the things, we all want the stuff. And I was inherently always had a very lovely, lazy side. I like to nap, et cetera, et cetera. And I always felt so guilty, and especially as a mom of 2 young kids. And we are taught to feel guilty for times when we are not doing. And that is a very, very Western type of mentality, because the Tao teaches us that doing and not doing support each other. What that means is, again, it's like what we talked about earlier. If you do, you get to a certain point inside of you that you should stop. And many of us, and in our culture of like work, till you drop, we don't heed that call to be lazy, to do nothing. So for me, I think it's important to really reframe what laziness is. Why is laziness bad? Why shouldn't we want to do nothing a little bit of the time or a lot of the time? I mean, it is such a natural need to want to rest, to want to relax, to want to chill. It is so natural. And to paint that with a brush where we all feel guilty if we do that, that's crazy. We're not robots.
I'm totally guilty of that. I totally feel guilty if I'm taking a little bit of time for myself or going on a walk, or, I'm not with clients. I just spin in guilt. It's so hard to allow yourself that time, because at the same time, like it's so essential. You need it. You need those winters in your life. You need time to surrender. You need time to kind of relax and not be strung so tight. I mean, isn't one of the other verses of the Tao talking about, very similar to the verse earlier, the bow that's always strung too tight will lose its spring, basically?
Yeah. And that's why, by the way, I didn't like include all the verses, because like for an introduction to the Tao, I thought it'd be nice to introduce each kind of philosophy once, but yes, you're absolutely right. And the thing that I tell people, I think it's so important to consider, is that your own inner voice, your own inner belief, or is that your programming? Because we all come with programming. I mean, in our first couple of years of life, we're completely programmed. We're not, we're taught. I talk about that in the book as well. Babies come in to the world with an idea of oneness. They don't realize their separation. They don't realize they're a separate being, separate from their mom, separate from the sun, separate from the milk that they want to drink, And so we teach them early on. We start labeling things and teaching them, and then we keep teaching them. And so then later as adults, what I've started to do, and this is why I say your self-awareness is your superpower. I start a conversation with myself like, okay, yeah, I feel guilty for wanting to do nothing. But is that my guilt or is that programmed guilt? And it's a good question to ask yourself. Or sometimes, is that my voice or my mother's voice or society's voice?
Practically speaking, what are some other practices that people can start with if this is the first time they've ever heard of this?
That is a great question. And in Don't Just Sit There, Do Nothing, each chapter I end with Do Your Tao. I love that section, and I loved adding that little section to the end of each chapter because I that's exactly what I wanted to do. Is I wanted to bring folks some practices that they can do right now, and some of it is just a shift in thinking, just a shift in perception. I didn't want to give too much work because that would be, hypocritical with a book called Do Nothing. So a lot of it is a shift in perception. I love to tell people that, okay, so for example, the first thing is creating those moments of stillness so that you can become an observer and not just a doer. Why I think stillness is so important, or some people may call it laziness, I don't know, but why the do nothingness is so important is you are able to stop and just become an observer for a second instead of a doer. And we all have that aspect of ourselves within ourselves, right? If you've ever meditated and you know that your brain just keeps going and then you're observing all your thoughts. So one part of you is thinking your thoughts, the other part is observing. Who's that observer? So it's nice to rest in the observer for a minute. And if you don't do that, if your schedule is completely packed, I tell people schedule unscheduled time. Like, I don't care if you throw in just 5 minutes to start with in the middle of your day with do nothing in capital letters on your calendar. And then it comes up and see what you want to do. Maybe you just sit and you look out the window and you watch a tree branch sway and move with the wind. And that's all you do. Maybe that's your one connection with nature for the day, is just watching a tree branch for a few minutes. And you see how it flows with what's going on around it. And maybe you bring some of that flow into yourself, or you look up at the sky for a second. Maybe you don't have time to meditate this morning and you're rushing the kids out. And as you step out of your door, you look up and you feel the expansiveness of the sky, and you just bring that within yourself for one moment. Or when you're in the middle of 1,000 things, you stop and you take a deep, deep inhale and a slow exhale. That is the simplest thing you can do. Deep inhale, slow exhale, and you realize how shallow your breath is most of the day. Really, really simple things.
Those are very simple things. I really love and appreciate that answer with lots of great practical tips. It's quite stunning the first time you kind of do this. First of all, like, you'll do nothing for a few seconds before the pull of your cell phone and social media, starts to grab your attention. And then, you just found that you wasted 20 minutes, scrolling Twitter or something. But
totally,
when you slow down and you like looking at a tree or looking at the sky, you realize, like, holy shit, like, there's a lot going on all the time around me everywhere that I don't ever pay attention to.
Yeah. And it's so funny. And as we realized when the pandemic first started, like, all of that stuff around us does not care what's going on with us. You think your ambitions or stuff that's not going right, it's just like everything. It's your whole world. We forget how myopic we become with our own lives. And then you look out there and you realize the sun shines, the wind blows, the tree grows, etc. There's a whole life, a whole world. And sometimes we just take it for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was deep in the pandemic and deep into the news cycle, I was listening to all kinds of different podcasts with all the news and updates and everything that was going on in other parts of the world. And you're right, like the ducks by my lake, they didn't give a shit. Like they didn't care. The birds flying around, they don't care. Like the plants that just grow and wave to you in the wind, none of them gave a shit about the news. And I realized I was getting so worked up about stuff that's never going to happen to me. And I can be sympathetic, obviously, but I don't need to waste my time learning about all the negative things that are happening in places where I will never be and things that I could never help myself. Nature just goes on its own. It's so wise until we come in and goof everything up.
Absolutely. And it's so funny because like I said before, like we consume more information in a day than people used to in their whole lifetime. And we're bombarded by just cataclysmic news. And it's so bad for our nervous system because like you said, a lot of the time, this stuff some of it is really far away. And I'm not saying just to be completely uninformed, but it is a must to take a break from the news cycle. It is absolutely, because when you are completely anxious and stressed out, first of all, you ruin your immunity. The immune system is so sensitive to our stress and our worries and our anxiety. So first of all, you're making yourself more likely to get sick. Second of all, you are no good to the world when you are just a complete anxious mess. And I know because I used to be an anxious mess for many years. You cannot do much good for the world when you are not in a centered, peaceful state yourself. That's why I say all the time, and we all hear it, change begins with you. Be the change you want to see. Create the energy within yourself that you'd like to see in the world, and you will touch people with that energy. When you are at your centered, peaceful, loving place within yourself, that's what you put out into the world.
That's lovely. We do live in a world that feels very heavy at times. There's a lot of heaviness going on. You talk about laughing and napping and chilling the fuck out, which I absolutely love.
Yeah.
How are some ways that we can bring more of that lightness into our, sometimes heavy existence?
So I think it's absolutely important to maybe you take a day that you do not check social media, do not check the news feed. And it's a day that if you have kids, you just play with your kids, you just spend with the family, you go for a walk, you do whatever it is that fills you up. If you can't take a whole day, because everyone has different schedules and different demands on them, then you take an hour or you take 15 minutes a day when you disconnect from everything. I think it all begins with you. I love a couple of minutes of meditation or deep breathing. Journaling is really great. Write all your stuff out. Get your negativity outside of yourself. You put all your worries and your anxieties on paper, and all of a sudden there's you created space between you and your anxious thoughts. And just make sure to do the things that fill you up. There's wonderful books you can read. May I suggest, don't just sit there, do nothing. There's walks to take. There's exercise to try. I think the world is filled with beauty and wonderful things, but sometimes we need to consciously turn our head away from the chaos in order to see it.
I love how you made all of this so simple and practical. Not that it's easy, but that it's simple. It's something we can grasp. Sometimes the Tao Te Ching is a little bit difficult to understand, and you've been able to make it really, very digestible. Can you explain the writing process and what that was like for you?
Absolutely. And part of me wanted to call it like the Tao for dummies, but that's not a really good self-helpy spiritual kind of name. But I fell in love with the Tao Te Ching many years ago. I do not expect everyone to do that. And I think everyone has their own passions and interests. And I happen to still be a spiritual, at my core, I'm just a spiritual searcher, and I always will be. I know that about myself. And I'm a writer. I was a writer before I wrote this book. And so it was just the natural thing to do. I started this book before the pandemic, and then that started. And I was like, this is so needed, this information. And what I say is, it is life-changing. It will change your life if you let it. but it does it so softly, which is what I love about it. What I love is these shifts in perception can be so small sometimes, and they can start slowly. And it doesn't have to be this 30-day challenge where, you take this course and you're completely a new person in 30 days. I just didn't want it to be like that. I wanted to put something soft out into the world because we have a lot of, we have a lot of hardness here already. And I wanted to give folks kind of a break, a breather from the world we live in right now. So I started collecting more translations of the Tao than what I myself was used to. I love a Stephen Mitchell translation, and there's another one that I had by Jonathan Starr, but I started, I found some very, very off the grid translations by students. And I just kind of for a year was all Tao all the time. I just submerged myself in these words, and I would analyze them and meditate on them and walk with them and think of them. And eventually I would use a verse. I would put together kind of my own translation. I would take a line from here, a line from there, and put together a verse that made sense, that felt solid to me. And then I would do my own translation of it in a really funny way, sometimes using curse words, in a way that like literally anyone, if you may read the verse and be a little confused and just know that that's totally normal, as my husband calls it, gobbledygook, because this is not simple. This is ancient philosophy. So what I wanted to do is after each verse, I put in like a very simple modern day translation in my own words that everybody would get. And then I would write an essay from my own life or observations from the world that really, really put that teaching into a modern day experience that people would really easily understand. And I would end each section with a do your Tao, which was sometimes a thought that I would be like a takeaway that you can carry with you maybe for a few days, or it would be an action, an invitation for a certain type of action. And I don't expect anyone to love every single one of these do your Taos, but I know that everyone can find something that will shift them, some really mind altering, perception shifting, reality bending experiences in there.
I'm so glad you mentioned gobbledygook. I have that written down. I'm so glad you put that in the book, like led with that. Like, wow, this is great. It's on my level for sure.
I mean, I'm all about honesty. Like there's, I would go and re-edit. We all us writers edit a lot of times. And at first, like the biggest hurdle is just to get it on paper, but then you edit and you edit again, you edit again. And every time I'd go back and edit, if something felt slightly inauthentic, I would change that around. I really stripped it down until it was just my truth. It was just truth. I didn't want to have anything, just no falseness in there, no pretentiousness. I wanted it to be as real as I believe the essence of the Tao is.
That's a very difficult thing to be so, vulnerable and honest. I think a lot of people would go the other way and try to not reveal so much about themselves. So I really appreciate that you did it in that way. You've mentioned journaling a few times, and I've talked to lots of people over the years about journaling. And only recently, like this month, did I actually start journaling. And I'm always a little surprised as I'm writing words, things are coming through me. They're not something that I premeditated on or I thought I would say. It's almost like the words are coming from the pen. Do you experience that when you write as well?
I experience that when I write everything. In fact, like even this book, I would meditate before I'd write each chapter. And sometimes, I knew the verse, but sometimes what I ended up writing was not at all what I expected. I'd be like, what? This is actually really good. Good job, whoever put that in my head. Because it does feel like that's why it's hard for me to be like very, oh, good job, Jessie. Like, I think it's a good job that I followed through on the vision I had. I'm really grateful for that because I haven't always been a follower througher. But I know for certain that the words that come through me. They don't come from me.
It's very much Stephen Pressfield kind of thing. Like when you sit down to do the work and you start writing, you start to get help from the universe or the muse or God or whatever you want to call it. But you have to, show some effort and show up a little bit for that action to actually get started for you. It is an interesting experience when you're going through it, though. What is your next project? Is there something else you're working on now that this is over? Or are you going to chill out a little bit and enjoy it?
Yeah, I don't know for sure yet because, like you said, I really believe you need to open yourself up to being that channel to put something out into the world that is really healing or necessary or maybe just fun and entertaining. God, I love to read, and there's plenty of novels that I read just for fun, but I am not quite ready to embark on another project yet. I write it anyway, like I journal. Sometimes I write in my notes section when I have thoughts. I always tell people like journaling doesn't have to be this hard thing. It is great to write with your hand and pen, but you know what? If you're just lying in bed and you have some thoughts and you want to just start like typing it out on your phone in the notes section, it's totally fine. It's fine. Like it's the whole process of just getting your thoughts outside of yourself. And then the more you do it, the more they flow. And so I'm not there yet. I'm full throttle in Don't Just Sit There, Do Nothing and the Tao Te Ching still. And I'm loving talking about it and promoting it. And that's where I am at. And I stop myself. Sometimes I say like, what is my second book going to be? What is my next? And then I stop myself because again, that's not me. That's that programming that makes me feel like, gotta keep going, gotta keep going, gotta keep moving, and I am here right now.
Yeah, another quote by Benjamin Hoff in The Tao of Pooh. The surest way to become tense, awkward, and confused is to develop a mind that tries too hard, one that thinks too much. And that's a really easy pattern to get into, and overthinking and worrying, getting anxious about the future. Your book just has so many great tips. It's very practical. It's easy to understand. We just really appreciate that you brought that light into the world. This has been an amazing conversation as well. What is one simple tip you would want the listener to take away from this conversation and apply in their lives?
Great question, Casey. If I had to just give one tip right now, based on where we are in the world, I would say choose love, not fear. There's so much stuff out there right now that stirs up fear and anxiety and worry in us. And I say, when that happens, shift your perspective, shift your mindset. And instead of saying like, I'm so scared, I got to be so careful, say, I'm going to be mindful. Sure, there's a lot of, there's a pandemic going on. Instead of saying, I am scared, instead of being scared, switch that around. Say, I'm going to be mindful. I'm going to be mindful in the world. That's a good way of looking at it. So just in every situation, when you can, stop yourself, ask if you're coming from fear, if you're sitting in fear, and try to shift that towards love.
Well, that is a beautiful answer. Jessie Kanzer, where can people go to connect with you and your work?
And thank you for asking that question, because that is important, isn't it, for me? So my book is actually ready for pre-order. It officially launches March 1st, but you can pre-order it anytime you hear this on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indie Bookshop, wherever books are sold. All of that information and ordering options is on jessiekanzer.com, JESSIEKANZER.com. And all my socials are on there as well. I'm at Jessie Kanzer on Instagram. And I'm a little different on TikTok. It's at Daily Tao, but you will find that all on jessiekanzer.com.
That is awesome. We will link to that in the show notes. I'm going to take a stab at this. Jessie Asya Kanzer. Did I get it right?
Close. Jessie Asya Kanzer.
Jessie Asya Kanzer, author of Don't Just Sit There, Do Nothing. Thank you so very much for your work, for demystifying something that can be sometimes confusing and elaborate and very ancient, but distilling it down into something... Exactly. You've been able to distill it down into something that's easy to understand. It's fun to practice. It brings a lightness to life. And we're just so grateful for that. And we're grateful for you and your work and your time to come on our show today. So thank you so very much.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful for your time as well.
Absolutely. We're grateful for you too. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.